It's the kids, right? Because the metaverse market is so heavily driven by the kids, so it's these damn kids cutting through the hype as well. And this is particularly relevant with Web3 at the moment. And you have to, from a brand's perspective, in fact, we don't really advise any of our brands really to go anywhere near Web3 if they're looking to acquire audiences, because the user base isn't there. We have MAU-wise in the metaverse, 520 million. That was our latest data point from last week, and over 99% of those are on Web2 platforms.
Welcome back to MetaRick, where we talk about emerging technologies, the metaverse, the blockchain, artificial intelligence. Today we've got Nic Mitham from Metaversed. I love the work that they're doing on just sharing insights about the overall market of the metaverse, Web3 versus non-Web3, how many daily active users are on these platforms, what's the demographic. Before that, he comes from co-founding a few really impactful companies in the industry, like the Super Awesome Agency, as well as the We.AR VR marketplace. And so I'm really excited to learn more about your story and what you've been working on. Before we get too deep into the conversation, I always like to start by just getting a little context in your words for what you're doing today and what the team's up to over at Metaversed.
It's been a pretty boring day going through supplier contracts, if I'm being very honest. I wish it could be more interesting. No, we're just we've got a stack of work on the moment, and different fields. We've got some digital twin stuff going on. We've got some AR, some VR. So unfortunately, all the boring stuff lands on my desk in terms of having to sign stuff off. So I wish I could be more meta about it, but it was quite a long,
Maybe
boring day today.
Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's start with what is the Metaversed? So what actually is the business?
So I've been in this space since 2006, so long time ago, long time. And it's interesting because I fell into the space completely by accident, and at the time, I had one son and a wife, and I was running an advertising agency, and one of my clients emailed me by mistake. It was meant to go to someone else, and I just read the subject line. It said Second Life. I'd never heard of Second Life at all. I'd been a gamer growing up, so I had the Commodore 64s and I'm showing my age now, the ZX81s and all the really old computers. I had them all, not from a coding perspective, but I just loved new technologies and sort of figuring out new stuff. So that was always my passion. Anyway, so I'm going to go and check out what this Second Life thing is. And, I knew the concept of 3D virtual worlds, but hadn't been into one. Logged into Second Life, and this was right at the time, sort of 2006, maybe early 2007, when brands were first starting to go in and sort of test the waters. And the user base, I think at the time, was about, and don't quote me, I don't know, maybe sort of 500,000 MAUs. So sizable, not colossal, but growing quite nicely. Anyway, long story short is 3 months after me discovering Second Life for the first time, I actually sold my shares in the ad agency. Said to my wife, look, this virtual worlds thing, I think is going to be huge. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do in it. Not really sure which route to take. But it's early, and I know if I get in early enough, something will kind of materialize. So quit my job and spent a year with no clients, kept going. Again, this is early days. My background was marketing and advertising, so I was blogging about the marketing aspects of virtual worlds and the different approaches that brands were taking inside Second Life. And also back then there was the likes of, say, Moshi Monsters and Club Penguin, a few others, mainly kids and tweens.
I love that you brought up Club Penguin. That is so often forgotten as a key player.
It's crazy, right? It's hilarious. So I was speaking at a conference last summer at Wembley Stadium in London, to a graduating class of football business students. And I don't know why. Oh, that's it. I was telling the story of the virtual world space, and I was mentioning Club Penguin and Moshi Monsters, and I just jokingly, and most of the audience I said was guys, so like 80% male, 20% female. And I just kind of jokingly said, anyone heard of Moshi Monsters or Club Penguin? And literally the whole room put their hands up. It was crazy. So that was colossal back then. So that was kind of like an early trigger for me in terms of, you know, the appeal of the metaverse to brands and the appeal of the metaverse for marketing, and then within the right platforms, the appeal of the metaverse for users, for kids, for players, for, you know, the residents, as we call them. So my business as it stands today was born out of a hunch 15, 16 years ago that, you know, there is a requirement in the sector for really high quality consulting, which is always data backed. You know, we'll probably touch on our data sets later on in the chat, but just built, you know, a lovely boutique consulting firm where we get really interesting projects. Nothing's the same, you know, we're surprised every day with what we get, and so we like to think that we're the most qualified consulting firm that serves the metaverse, and part of that is simply because we've been doing it 5-6 times X most other companies, and B, because of that we've done so many projects that we know what works and what doesn't work, you know. So we typically, well, of course, no one likes to make mistakes to their clients, but we can rule out ideas really, really early because we've seen it tried, you know, in the past. So yeah, that's who we are.
I love that, and I think that expertise is something that's really important right now, especially because you have all these brands wanting to dive into the metaverse and wanting to dabble with extended reality, but they don't necessarily have someone on their team who's been doing this for 10 years. They don't have a fully built out VR studio or extended reality studio. And someone like yourself has dabbled with a lot of platforms and skipped a lot of mistakes and kind of can help them skip those mistakes and kind of get to efficiency faster.
Yeah, and you know, it's cutting through the hype as well, and this is particularly relevant with Web3 at the moment. And there's an awful lot of hype with Web3 virtual worlds, and you know, we track all of them. We have our Web3 index, which is a monthly league table, so you know, we keep close tabs on all those platforms. As of right now, there's 78 browser or app-based Web3 worlds either live or in development, and you have to, you know, from a brand's perspective, in fact, we don't really advise any of our brands really to go anywhere near Web3 if they're looking to acquire audiences, because the user base isn't there. You know, we have MAU-wise in the metaverse 520 million. You know, that was our latest data point from last week, and over 99% of those are on Web2 platforms. They're not on Web3. So
one thing I think is really interesting is what you guys have developed with your reporting on the metaverse has been incredibly valuable to the whole industry, right? Like I know my company over at Engage, like my full-time gig, we look at those reports a ton. I know people at large companies that I've worked with in the past are constantly talking about these reports as an indicator of like which platforms should I focus on and what out there is going to be the most beneficial. So I think you're really well informed with the data that your team is collecting on this. So when you say something like steering brands away from Web3 towards these Web2 platforms, I think that carries a little more weight than the typical person saying that. And so I'm curious, like, where do you think Web3 has a role in this? Do you think it's just far too early? Does the blockchain add any value to a brand? Or what's your take on Web3's place versus a Web2 platform?
So here's the crux of the issue as it stands in the market at the moment. So the average user age of someone who's regularly using the metaverse and MAU is 13. They're 13 years old. They're not 26. You know, we do calls all the time with big marketing departments, and we always ask them at the start, have a guess what the average age of a user is, and we'll get 32, 28, 27, 21. No one's going into the low teens at all. It's 13. And it's 13 because so much of the user base is driven by the likes of Roblox and Fortnite. Okay, so virtual, what we mentioned Club Penguin earlier. Virtual worlds, the ability to socialize with your friends, the ability to create either with your friends or on your own. Being in a sandbox, being taken away out of your room, your bedroom, your classroom, and going into virtual spaces really appeals to kids and tweens. 8 to 14 ish. That's the sweet spots, and that's where all the users are. That's where all the advocates are. That's where all of the exciting stuff is happening. And the age 18 plus is only 14% of the total MAU. So the near term issue that Web3 companies have is you've got to be 18 to have a crypto wallet. Or at the very least, you've got to be 18 to transfer fiat to crypto. I.e., 18 is typically the age in most countries where you're allowed to get crypto, to buy cryptocurrency, which is often needed within a Web3 platform. Okay. So if all the users are here, 13, and you've got these 78, 79, 80 Web3 companies trying to get users. The older demographics aren't interested, and I'll come on to that in a second. The lowest hanging fruit is unfortunately legally 5 years below them. All the users are 13. Yet there's a crypto wall, there's a wallet wall as we call it, for these Web3 platforms. So they're going to really struggle. They're going to struggle with their user acquisition. They're going to struggle to create economies which are worthwhile for people to be in when so much of the play mechanic is like play to earn or learn to earn or X to earn. It's these mechanics which we're not big fans of. So there's going to be some crunch in the Web3 sector, and it's going to start coming pretty soon, where there's either additional fundraising rounds needed, and the companies have shown no real sort of user growth process, or user acquisition's tough. When you've got 78, 80 worlds pretty much going after the exact sort of user, and the mistake that there's a few mistakes, but they don't appreciate or will not acknowledge or admit that all the users are underage for their platform. So there is a bit of smoke and mirrors. Another issue we see with a lot of these Web3 companies is you look at the founders or the exec teams, and none of them have launched games. And I use the term games to describe virtual world because so much of it is gamified. They've got no previous track record of bringing games to market, and anyone that's done that knows how damn hard it is. So they're lacking expertise, and simply thinking that by having their own token, that they're going to sell millions of dollars worth of the token, and they're going to sell billions of dollars of land, and unfortunately the reality will be very, very different. So that's one of the issues. That's one of the issues with Web3.
That's really interesting. So there's a million other questions I have, but I want to stick on this for just a second, because that's a unique answer. Typically when I ask someone about Web3 versus Web2, they immediately start jumping to the complexities of setting up a wallet, and they focus on the blockers for older demographics versus I like how you're focusing more on what's preventing younger demographics from adopting Web3, because those are most of the users that are in virtual worlds in general, whether it's Web2 or Web3. So I think that's interesting. Yep. Now, I've been following the story of Aquint and Aquint Studios really closely because they've recently kicked off a Metaverse practice. Nate Essen is running that. He was episode 1 of Meta-Rick. I really appreciate some of his perspective on this industry. And I love one of the things he talks about is that the metaverse is kind of a spectrum, where on one side you have virtual worlds and spaces where people can interact in these kind of virtual environments. Then the other side of that spectrum is the idea of digital ownership and being able to own these digital assets. And so I'm wondering what your take is on the value of that digital ownership. Is the blockchain and NFTs the way to do that, or is there an alternative to provide that? Or maybe it's just not all that important in your perspective versus the socializing in the space itself.
All right, so I'm going to go back to Roblox again, and I'll try not to talk about them exclusively, but because they've got such a sizable user base, they're the best example, right? So there's a couple of things here. So, and again, it's the kids, right? Because the metaverse market is so heavily driven by the kids, so it's these damn kids. They don't care how their assets are housed, where they're housed. They as long as they can access them, and they can always access them, you know, they don't really care. And kind of related to that, and I'm going to touch on interoperability, which is a beautiful term and often touted as it's not the metaverse until it's fully interoperable. And again, here's the other issue, you know, and ironically, the Web2 will be responsible for whether or not Web3 is successful with interoperability, and I'll explain to you why. So, you know, interop, you know, the ability to take a digital asset from one platform to another seamlessly, you know, take your Gucci sneakers from Decentraland to the Sandbox or whatever it might be. And I hear so many people talking about, oh, it has to be interop. First off, I don't see protests inside any Web2 platforms of the users saying, we want interoperability. They don't even know what it is, you know. And the more important point, the more commercial point is the Web3 platforms have got no users. All the users are on Web2. And all the bad, you know, and these Web2 centralized, you know, centralized is almost used as a bad word, you know, oh, you can't be centralized. But the issue here is there's no way that Roblox, as an example, is going to allow interoperability, yeah, to allow its users within their walled garden to leave and to easily take their assets into a Web3 platform. Why would they? You know, they're a public company. You know, their major income stream, revenue stream, is from the users. So there'll be very few. I read that as virtually zero Web2 companies that have all the users that would willingly embrace interoperability, because it's not a two-way street, because the Web3 has no users. So this is a related issue to this whole topic of digital.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to like whenever I talk about like a brand choosing a platform to adopt as like a metaverse platform, I always think of it as like there's two value propositions that really matter. The number one is the one you've been talking about, which is the user base. What's the volume of eyeballs that I can get access to, and how well do those eyeballs match my demographic of the audience I want to engage with? That's the top reason for engaging with any of this. It's like essentially a channel. The second is the tool set that's provided for you on that platform for how easy it is to build, host, manage the virtual experiences. So those are kind of like the two ways that a platform can add value for a brand or a user joining. But in either case, interoperability becomes tough because you don't want to share users, because that limits the value your platform provides, because your users are leaving your platform. And then you don't want to share features either because you want to have differentiators that cause people to use your platform and want to stay sticky. So I hear that. I think that there's definitely some challenges to that idea of decentralization. Do you see any value in it at all? Like just to play devil's advocate, or we can pivot on to the next topic?
No, I absolutely do see value in some instances, some use cases for being able to take assets from one world to the next. What's a related issue to that is that's a lot harder. It's actually the easy bit is the technical bit. The difficult bit is recreating the asset, because you know there needs to probably be a centralized middleman who can convert assets that have been designed in one world to be rezzed up to be shown accurately in the next. So it's a little bit like you need a universal translator. And a good friend of mine, Ruben's, working on this, and that's been for years. So, yeah, in principle, it's a nice idea, but at the moment, it's more of a sort of a problem looking for a solution, and no one's asking for it except people who are big proponents of Web3 and positioning it as just completely better than Web2, which isn't really true.
I hear that. I think the the one use case that might stand out is like virtual influencers, which like is a growing market in itself. It's still relatively small, but the idea of like these VTubers, right, where if you're going to create a whole digital identity around this avatar, where that avatar could actually become a brand advocate, it could start to become like a large following on TikTok or Instagram, or as a musician. Like there's all these examples. And Christopher Tavers, shout out to him, great guy to follow on this topic. He founded virtualhumans.org, which is an amazing resource for learning more about virtual influencers. Chris, we need to get you on the podcast at some point. But I think that is an interesting use case where the interoperability starts to matter more for that market. Because if you're going to be taking that virtual influencer from platform to platform and having that same identity, you might need a presence in all those different channels. And then you might need to have the same outfits and the same avatars and the same kind of ways of expressing yourself. And as that gets bigger, I wonder if users will start to care more and more about that as well. So in the short term, maybe the technical hurdles and the need from the audience is not big enough to warrant solving that problem in the short term. But in the long term, I could definitely see it becoming a bigger aspect of things. Now, I want to circle into a different topic. Sure. So you were talking a lot about the main user set being like an average of like 13 years old. And I'm sure that that's heavily skewed by Roblox specifically, just having such a massive user base. Sure. So kind of moving out of Web3 into just the Web2 platforms. What do you think that there's only a use case to market to younger demographics, or where do you see the business to business or the enterprise use case playing a role in the metaverse?
Well, I would say about 70% of our business is B2B enterprise. So what we're talking here is things like digital twins. Got some very interesting manufacturing projects at the moment integrating IoT and AR and digital twins. So that's really, really big for things like manufacturing and supply chain production, real estate. Excellent use cases, not just for, say, being able to track IoT data in a virtual factory. That's on the internal side, but even for, say, marketing and sales, digital twins, real estate, very, very interesting. Workshops and training is another little vertical that we do a lot of work in, and then events and award shows, and we did a really, really super cool project for McDonald's with our joint friends at Studio Now.
Yeah, let's dive into that, because that was a big thing that put you guys on my radar. Like I saw one of your Metaverse reports get shared at a kind of a community event that I was a part of. Shout out to XR Pub Crawl with Lisa Payton and Billy Goldman. But then I was talking to Chad and the guys over at Studio Now, and they mentioned how they've expanded out of just photo video production and they're doing events and kind of tapping into the metaverse. And this McDonald's project was so interesting. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how that came about, why McDonald's even wanted to come into the metaverse, and kind of what that process looked like for them.
It's interesting. So every year they have an award show called the Feel Good Marketing Awards, and it's to recognise and reward their global ad agencies. So think of it as a B2B. Yeah, like a B2B award show. And before the lockdowns, they'd had them in physical hotels, just like a real award shows. People would fly in, and it's black tie and food and drink, and it's an award show. Yes. The lockdowns happened. They couldn't do it in person. They tinkered, we think, with some sort of video, massive Zoom calls and that sort of stuff. Don't think it worked as well as they hoped it would. So someone at McDonald's had the idea of, hey, let's do it in the metaverse. So of course that then was put on Studio Now's plate, and they pulled us in to pitch. We presented our ideas, and we won the pitch, beat some very big companies to win it. And
so actually, let's talk about that for a quick second, and then we'll get into the actual kind of project, because one of the big things that I try and focus on is the business side of the metaverse, right? And I think that there's a lot of folks that have been around VR for 10 to 20 years. There's a lot of folks talking about the philosophy of where it can go. but there's a lack of business acumen with like go-to-market specialists, marketers, and salespeople that are focusing on this. So when you're pitching something so creative and so not proven, right? Like this is an emerging process and idea. How do you win that pitch? Like how do you go in and kind of position yourself as the winner?
Creatively and technically. Creatively with the ideas that we presented to them in terms of just all the things that they could do with an award show, you know, not forgetting that it's in the metaverse, so anything's possible, you know, and it would have been very easy just to recreate, you know, a real world hotel and have it just like an award show would be, but in the metaverse. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a bit boring. So, you know, we gave them a whole range of ideas, different locations, you know, riffing off the McDonald's brand, so on and so forth. So creatively, we impressed them. And then technically, you know, they gave us a list of requirements. You know, they wanted no download, they wanted it in the browser, they wanted it, you know, to look photorealistic. So, of course, we know all the platforms. You know, we have, you know, we're platform agnostic and we have relationships with pretty much all of them. And, you know, it was pretty obvious from the word go which platform that we would use. It's called Odyssey. And once we took them in for some demos there, they were pretty much sold, you know, and because that platform is so good and so crisp and the user experience is so great and it's UE5 and it's just lovely. It wasn't difficult for them to see our idea inside that Odyssey platform. So
when you were presenting, I love how you broke that down into two categories, because I think the metaverse, whenever you're pitching these projects, it really is a combination of creative vision and technical acumen, right? Like, are you secure enough? Do you provide all of the technical things that a company needs? But also, are you a good creative partner for building such a unique experience? So when you're pitching the creative side, is that mostly like a traditional kind of like slide deck and kind of mock-ups, or are you creating a demo 3D environment and bringing them inside of it? Like, how do you show the creative ideas?
It kind of depends for the clients. It depends on the speed of the brief. Some of our projects we have to turn around super quick. You know, with McDonald's we gave them some sort of we gave them mood boards and visual references, and the thing is the key was the brand, you know, and you know, wanting to have the creative license to try and extrapolate the brand a little bit into the metaverse, but at the same time recognizing that they've got a whole big department of people who are paid to protect the brand, you know, and the brand ID. So we managed to kind of metaverse it enough to look really, really slick, but it was still on brand, you know, and that was kind of the key. So what we did was we created a digital twin of their Chicago HQ as the location, a place of familiarity, you know, lovely, shiny new HQ. So digital twin of that. The real world building has got 9 floors. So we thought it'd be super cool to actually get have the award show on the 10th floor. So we recreated a rooftop garden with a really imposing golden arches as the offset, a colossally sized interactive media screen. You know, we had Chris, the CEO. We had Morgan and others. We had their top executives presenting the show. So the show was actually in November, but what we did back in July of last year is, because the show's already pre-scripted and the run of show is determined, we actually green screened and motion captured all of the top execs delivering their award nominations, their speeches, their segments back in July. So, you know, we had all that lovely captured, the mocap data, the audio. So then we recreated their avatars into Ready Player Me avatars, and then did some really cool stuff with alpha channels and that kind of thing. So that on the day of the show in November the 10th, I think it was, all the attendees to the show were looking at a stage, looking at the CEO, Chris, and if you didn't know, you'd think that was Chris live in the moment, you know, because his avatar is on stage. But in fact, it was, you know, 4 or 5 months prior that we actually first captured it. So we did some really, really cool stuff with that. Super pleased. And, I think that we'd like to say that's kind of, it sounds silly to say set the standard, but we think, best practice was applied by us in terms of how we onboarded all the attendees, and we had concierges, and we had some really good interactive areas, and we did it in stages so that they wouldn't show up on the day of the show and people couldn't drive their avatars. So we did it really carefully, but wrapped in the brand as well, so that there was really beautifully created branding throughout the entire building. So the overall experience luckily went off without a hitch. A really, really interesting project, and I guess, to sum it up, it's a good example of how you can take a B2B event and make it super engaging, and allow people from all over the world to attend it without having to fly in. So, and all those things that we all know are some of these metaverse benefits, it kind of all came together nicely.
Yeah, I think it's such a strong example of a virtual event done well. Like executing like in every way, right? Like the high production on brand, like very engaging, but also easily accessible.
It's even other things like having an understanding of user concurrencies in a single instance. Okay, and you see a lot of the Web3 companies, and some Web2 to be fair, where they hold these huge big parties and they say they've got 2,000 users on the same shard in the same instance, and isn't that cool? Oh, it's horrible. Imagine going to a virtual concert and there's 100,000 people there, and you've got to stand at the back virtually. This sucks. And there's these little things that a lot of people overlook. There's a really fine balance. There's nuances to user concurrencies in shards, and for different environments, you might only want to limit it to 5, and so with McDonald's, we actually had 40 per instance. And then we were just stacking the shards on the servers, because we felt that was enough people in a shard to make it look as if there's, it's popular, there's something going on here. But then every person, the way that we positioned the seats, the burger seats, was in 3 rows, but every single person had a clear view of the stage, and they were close enough to feel as if they were right at the front. So, and it's little things. It's little things, to your point, little things like that you only know once you've done it.
You don't want to give you don't want to lose the advantage of a virtual environment, right? Like we at Engage are doing this massive concert for Fatboy Slim, and it's got some really cool little interactive elements in it, like a little roller coaster ride and like stuff. I don't want to spoil it for everyone because some of it's gonna be a surprise, but there's some really, really cool interactive components where if you had 200 people doing it at the same time, it might actually take away from the intimacy of the experience, versus if you cap it at like 50 users per instance and just scale up more instances, you're giving everyone a much more engaging, more unique experience. Almost like everyone gets a VIP event.
I was actually in one of your builds this morning.
Oh, nice.
So I'm
very
on
cool.
One of their groups.
I might have to cut that. I don't know if we're supposed to talk about that publicly. Yeah, that's all
really?
good.
Well, they've press released it, and they're banging it all over LinkedIn.
It's everywhere, but I think we have some limitations on what we can say. No, it's all good. I'll just beep out the word, and people can have the mystery of it. So something else that I don't want to leave the McDonald's thing just yet, because I think these big use cases, there's a lot people can learn from true been done successful use cases. So one of the things that you've talked about with McDonald's is a lot of the production and the use of partners, working with Studio Now, working with what was the platform called again? Working with Odyssey. It's a big undertaking, right? And I just hosted a podcast with this guy, Rolf from Germany, and he brought up an amazing point, which is everyone thinks that a VR headset, the hardware, is the most expensive cost. It's really not. It's actually one of the cheapest parts of the whole thing, because there's a whole team of people that need to build the experience. You need the 3D modeling, you need the production of the video of the CEO talking. Like, there's all these other moving parts. And so all in on something like that, like what would be the cost to produce the digital twin in the event and take all of those other factors into account?
So obviously I won't talk specifically about the McDonald's pricing, but I can certainly, you know, say, okay, what if it was for brand X? I mean, really, if you're looking at a digital twin, you know, of a certain size, you know, and if you're looking to run an event inside it, you know, and you've got to have, you know, interactivity, and there's got to be a theme and a run. If it's an award show, there's got to be a run of show, and then how are the presenters presenting? Is it live present? Is it pre-recorded? Is it motion captured, etc., etc.? You know, even as a starting point, you know, if you're not spending more than a $250,000, you're probably not spending enough, because to your point, it's not just, you know, we're the planners, we're the architects, you know, and then we have builders, and then we've got graphic artists, and then we've got CGI guys, and we've got server guys, and then we've got the platforms, then we've got the concierges, you know, so on and so on, so forth, audio. So, you know, to pull off an event like a virtual award show, there isn't a single company really that can do all of that to a quality level that we.
I'm guessing there's probably like,
you know,
like in a case like the award show or an internal town hall or something, or like an internal company-wide conference, there's not like a marketing budget associated to it. But if you're going to do something like an activation in Roblox, or like all of a sudden you're probably going to have to double or triple that budget to also incorporate the marketing and advertising around it, probably, right?
And okay, so you actually touch on a really, really interesting point, and this is more to do with, say, the Roblox stuff. Is you don't need to spend that much to be inside Roblox. Sure, you know, a big brand would probably want to pay a lot of money because they're a big brand, and you know, big brands get quoted big budgets or big proposals from suppliers. But the key to it is the creativity, and so another common mistake we see with a lot of brands who have been convinced to go into Web3. You go to their plot of land or their venue, and there's a huge skyscraper, you know, huge buildings. And a common mistake a lot of developers make is that they think just because you can build something really big, that you should. Yeah. And we often say that design is an output, not an input. What I mean by that is that you should get the campaign mechanics, the creativity of the campaign, you know, the essence of what that campaign is, planned first, and have that be on brand, and have that be on budget and on brief, and any other words starting with B. But you shouldn't think about the build yet. You know, once the campaign has been, you know, structurally designed, once the creativity has been agreed and what the actual campaign, then you think about design. You know, that's when you think about big buildings. So where I'm going with this is, with Roblox, you can get into Roblox quite cheaply and be successful if you've got a really good idea.
I love that that resetting of expectations that you just put out there, right? Is like, I think that for a lot of companies, like it's slowing down, but there was a big period of time where every metaverse activation was basically a PR grab of like a headline for a day, and then saying like, we checked the box, we're appeasing our investors, we are in the metaverse. Versus now, I think there's a rethinking happening where it's like, well, what's the value of it? Like, what's the business use case? And some business use cases are worth, you know, building out $1 million activation and then $1 million in PR on top of that to get everyone involved. But other activations don't need all that, and you could probably accomplish quite a bit for a lot less. And so I guess one of the things I'd be curious about, since you mentioned 70% of your customers are B2B, what are some of the use cases that are coming up the most, and how are these companies measuring the success of the use case?
So I mentioned digital twins and factories earlier. So that's a very interesting use case. You know, the ability for people to visit a factory virtually, as opposed to having to fly around the world.
When you say someone visiting a factory, is that a customer visiting and doing a tour, or?
Yeah, so we've got a client that likes to onboard new employees by visiting one of its factories. You know, and typically pre-COVID, that been flying them in and so on and so forth. So that's a compelling value-driven use case.
Why is that important to them to onboard that way?
Because well, why is it important for them for a new employee to be onboarded by looking at a factory? because their products are so iconic, and the factory is in turn iconic as well. So it's almost telling the history of the story with one of its most popular product lines. That's
and I guess the output of that would be, sorry, I know we're getting really tactical here, but I think it's helpful. The output of that is like the employee is going to be more excited about joining and boost morale, which would hopefully boost retention and help them get more excited about the information they're learning and being able to soak that information in better. Is that kind of the end goal there?
Yeah, there's all of those. There's the cost savings of not having to travel virtually, sorry, in the real life. There's the ability to go back, repeat visits. You if you want to go back back into the factory a week later, you just click a couple of buttons and you're there. So it's not a one-off. It's an ongoing, living, breathing thing, and that's often the way that we position the metaverse to our enterprise clients, is that you haven't got to tick all the boxes with your first deployment, the first activation. Think of it as a flag in the ground, an MVP, whatever you want to call it, and learn from it. So we work with a customer service, outsourced customer service company, and in their corporate strategy, they view the metaverse as where they'll be doing business in 5 years. Serving customers in the metaverse. So we're holding their hands now, taking short steps into virtual worlds so that they can actually start figuring out how it's used. So they've got a grander plan, which we work alongside them to create. So, but workshops, virtual training is very, very popular, and even just socializing, giving employees a space to just hang out and catch up with existing friends or make new ones, which is kind of the essence of why these worlds are so popular for the younger kids, right? Because they love the socialization of it. So
that's such a good point. I think that's an under talked about thing, is just this sense of community building and the emotional connection people make to it. So like I've talked about this on the podcast before, but like I'm like the VR guy here in San Diego. Like I've got a couple different headsets, and I've put so many people through their first time using a VR headset, and it's always the same reaction of this childlike giggle and someone getting so excited and just being like the sense of awe, right? And that's something that companies invest millions of dollars into, with avocado toast and virtual happy hours and weird cooking classes and stuff, and they think that solves the problem. Versus these virtual spaces, I think, are an amazing alternative where it sounds expensive because you've never bought it before, and it's like this new thing, so it's kind of shocking. But when you compare the cost of it to what you're accomplishing and you start thinking about the business use case, all of a sudden it becomes this investment that I think actually is more efficient than a lot of those alternative ways to accomplish that same goal of socializing and developing and investing in the culture of the business.
100%.
Yeah, so this has been such an awesome conversation, Nick. I'm really glad you're on here. So I've got some other questions for you. One of the things that I'm always curious about is when you're a consulting firm and you're kind of helping these businesses for an emerging tech that's so new. What's your advice for a company on when they want to build some things in-house? Like, what are the things that you try and coach them up on, like, you should own this piece of the puzzle and let's help you build a team around that, versus the things that you should find a partner like a Metaverse or a Studio Now or a platform? Like, what are the things that a brand should own versus the things they should try to outsource?
So, we know some companies that have tried to do stuff in-house, on platforms like Portals and Spatials, and fantastic. If they can commit, if a company can commit internal resource to give people the job of building stuff or creating places inside metaverses, that's really, really good. And in fact, we had a call this morning with a company doing just that, but they're bringing us in to help guide them. The basic building blocks of creating 3D objects they can handle in-house, but we're advising them on what the use cases are and where they should go with it. But I guess you do have to use the analogy that that monkeys can draw. Animals, you don't need to be. Anyone can create stuff given tools, but then it's well, how good do you want it to look? And again, there's too many virtual worlds where we can see within 5 seconds that they just haven't got the good designers. They haven't got the creatively adept skill sets to create things which are beautiful. Of course, this is important. It's important for all companies. I'm talking about sort of brand management here and how the brands are reflected. But you shouldn't just be slapping a logo on a wall. There should be more creativity there, and creative design is a very difficult skill, which is unlikely that companies would have in-house. So I think companies. So I'm trying to answer your question, but I'm trying to just paint it slightly differently, which is companies should absolutely explore internally, but they're going to hit a ceiling where they just can't do it as well as a third party, and that's where we would come in, and actually advise them on, well, maybe there's a better platform. We're porting alt space builds at the moment for companies that had builds in there, and now they need a new home. So we're probably one of the best companies to advise owners of alt space builds where to go, because we know all the platforms.
Well, that's actually an interesting topic in itself. Is so alt space, like, I think has sent like a ripple through the space, right? I think there's a lot of emotion attached to alt space just because they've been around for so long, and so many of the early builders, especially in fully immersive VR with the headset, like that was the go-to platform for a lot of people. So what is your advice when you talk about people trying to move to a new platform? Like, is there certain criteria that would guide you one way versus another? Like, what's been your kind of your guidance?
Yeah, future roadmaps. What else do they want to do with those existing builds? They just want to replicate it and use it as is. But where do they want to go with it, and where they want to go with it will then dictate which platforms that we would think of based on the feature sets, the incumbent feature sets of the platforms. Number of people that expect, is it internal, is it customers, what's this, the audience size, is it pixel streaming, is there ongoing maintenance costs involved, and how often do they want to maintain it? Do they want to have live events? Do they want to take a browser built experience and make it HMD compatible? There's a whole list of things which would then advise us on where we think they're best placed.
I think that makes a lot of sense, like a custom recommendation, because there's so many platforms, right? Like
yeah. Is it, does it work on a mobile device? This is one of our libraries. We're working with a company, big FMCG company in Africa, and desktop penetration, I think it's less than 10%.
This topic has come up so much, and I speak at some.
Yeah. But let me just finish off the data point. Sorry to butt in. So, whereas mobile phone, cell phone ownership's up at 85-90%. So of course, which platforms are we going to choose for them? They're going to be mobile compatible. So that's another thing.
Yeah, this has come up a lot on panel discussions I've been on at various events, and like just in casual conversation. Is Africa is a huge adopter of metaverse as a concept for their country, and this idea of remote working and being able to gain access to business opportunity, especially the younger generation in Africa. There's all these issues there that I was unaware of when it comes to traffic, and like commuting could take 4 or 5 hours to commute to one of these major cities within the country, or within the continent in various countries. And they have different problems with internet connectivity and the infrastructure built around this technology. So while a lot of big business in the States or even in Europe are saying, like, let's start adopting VR for social collaboration within the company, in Africa, that might not be an option just because of bandwidth. And so would you say that for them, it's more about like mobile applications or WebXR, and there's a kind of a different form of innovation that they lean into there? Yeah.
In Africa, well, I wouldn't even try and give you that smart an answer. They've got more
so
phones
it's just straightforward.
than laptops. It's as simple as it's a consumer campaign. So we want to know the easiest way to reach the consumers and take them to the metaverse. So it's through their
I think
phone.
this emphasizes the importance of kind of maybe not fully open source, but the idea of diversity of perspective, right? Because if we want to build the metaverse to take advantage of this global inclusivity that gets talked about a lot, then we need to have that perspective in the room to be able to understand the problems that are happening in different regions of the world, right? Like we can't just build for one region. We've got to be able to build this globally for it to not have all these kind of unintentional biases, right? Like we'll just bias things into the code based on who's coding it. So this is a question that I want to start asking more consistently on the pod. But one of the things I think is interesting is that there's kind of two different players in the space. You've got legacy brands that are entering the space that have a ton of resources and are trying to find a way to be innovative and forward thinking. And then you have these early stage startups that are entering the space and trying to kind of push the status quo and be really agile with how they attack it. And so from your perspective, I'm wondering if there's one big brand that you think is doing the metaverse the right way and has really come out with an amazing program or campaign versus one like early stage young brand that might be doing something really different.
I think it's too early to give kudos to any of the younger brands at the moment, because they need to get user traction, and everyone's got one great idea, right? But there's some interesting companies that we're watching, who are new to the market, mainly on the fashion side of things and virtual design and UGC, which is interesting. But they've got to prove that they can grow and scale their businesses. So, and that's probably not the answer that you were hoping for.
Well, it is interesting that you call out that there's like almost like a collection of these startups, right? Because you're calling out like fashion and this UGC. There's like one sector there that seems to stand out. And I do some advising for Exclusible, and I know that that's a big target for them is like luxury goods, and Metaverse Fashion Week's happening right now, right? Yeah. So what do you think about that vertical is causing them to innovate or do a little bit more?
I love it. I love that vertical, and it's super powerful. If you think, fashion and UGC, so what is the very first thing anyone ever does the first time they go into a virtual world? They create their avatar. They are presented with the ability to customize. So it's presented to users right off the bat that they have the ability to customize themselves. And I've seen this thousands and thousands of times with doing onboarding, and everyone really gets into it, and it's interesting because there's kind of there's two different cohorts so this is the topic of using an avatar as your virtual version of yourself in a virtual world. And there's two camps. There's augmentalists and there's immersionalists. And the augmentalists, as we call them, they will create their avatar to look like them. So they'll upload their face. They'll wear similar clothes. They'll have similar hairstyle and skin tones and all that sort of stuff. They view their avatar as just an extension, an augmentation of themselves. Okay, whereas, and you see a lot of this inside Second Life. There's another cohort of people who view their avatars as them completely letting go of their real world persona. Men becoming women, vice versa, dogs becoming dolphins, you name it, and it's very, and I wish I had more time to really learn, understand that in greater detail. I know it enough, but it's really, really, really interesting. So sorry, coming back to your point with fashion. So it's virtual goods. I mean, we worked with L'Oreal back in 2008 on one of the world's first ever branded virtual goods campaigns. It's proven. It's a provenly popular model. So many different verticals. I came up with the term meta brands back in 2010. I wish I'd trademarked it back then. But this whole idea of giving users the ability to create clothing UGC is literally a limitless vertical, limitless in terms of how brands can make money from it and how creators can make money. Because again, the most creative will win. You know, the best looking design. I'm coming back to this point of quality over just because I can build something means that I should. Yeah, you build something really, really cool, then it's going to be popular. And if your motive is to make money, you're best off creating the really cool stuff, because that's what the kids, going back to these kids again, that's what the kids are going to like. So yeah, I mean, you know, Fabricant's another company that we're keeping a close eye on. There's a few others, sort of startups or recently funded companies in this kind of virtual fashion space. You mentioned Fashion Week in Decentraland. Let's hope a few people showed up for it. There's a big opportunities for a big, going back to your first point, there's great upsides for really big existing brands to port real world products into the metaverse, but being even smarter to allow the fans of their brands the ability to create something underneath their brand umbrella. Super powerful, super powerful. So big brands have got big opportunities, but you know, again, nimble often works. So you know, there'll be thousands and thousands and thousands of brands created by people in their bedroom who just come up with something cool that other people want to buy, or they want to wear it and buy it. You know, so it is a pretty open playing field, and it's very, very interesting.
With generative AI coming into the game, UGC is going to become so much more democratized, where you're not going to need the tactical skill of designing and building out the asset. Instead, you can just describe it and trial and error until you get the one that's close enough to what you want. It's interesting because, like, when you talk about fashion, and it's almost like when people first come on, they customize. It's attached to their identity, so it's either mirroring their physical identity or experimenting with something new and unique. But it's kind of reminding me of when I was working a lot in automotive, where it's a very visual product, and these big automotive brands, they didn't get to take advantage of e-commerce the same way a lot of the cheaper kind of consumer goods products were able to. And now with these 3D virtual worlds, they're able to engage customers in a brand new way, where they can put these really big, expensive visual products in front of them and customize them without any sort of physical storeroom, and not just like a brochure, but legitimately getting to visualize this 3D product in all the different configurations. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that's because automotive is an easy example to think of, but I wonder if there's other kind of businesses like that that come to mind for you, of like visual stories that brands really can take advantage of in a 3D space.
Well, I think it's a bit deeper than that, because every brand has a story. You know, every brand has a history. Every brand has an original, you know, story of, you know, an origin story. You know, every, as you know, big brand has that. So, you know, and we have these discussions a lot about creating branded virtual worlds or branded experiences where you're not overtly selling or trying to sell a product, but you're allowing customers of the brand, fans of the brand, advocates, you know, ambassadors of the brands, a way to actually be inside the brand, you know, to learn about the founders, to learn about the original story of how the idea, you know, to go to the first restaurant, to go to the whatever it might be, you know, to go whatever it might be. You can use. This is storytelling, you know. This is. I won't use the term transmedia because I'm trying to wean myself off it, but virtual storytelling in the context of brands and creative branded spaces. Any brand can, literally any brand can do that if you're
well,
if you're smart
it's actually
enough.
just sparked an idea on the fly right here, where like gaming is such a heavy influence for all this stuff, right? And I just started thinking to myself, like the Harry Potter game that's so popular right now. The reason why it's so popular is like the brand of Harry Potter, the story of Harry Potter is something everyone's so excited about, and this game gives you an opportunity to go partake in that story. It's the reason why all of the big movie studios have invested in creating games with their IP, right? For a brand, if your onboarding workflow as an employee was to be the founder and play through the founding story in a short simulated version of opening that first restaurant and going through what the founder had to go through to create the company, or like that for like those quick little scenes. Like,
I might be stealing.
that's so
this idea,
cool, right? like
No,
the Gucci
yeah.
movie just came out. Imagine you work for Gucci and you get to go live through that story in like a 10 to 20 minute simulation. Like,
Love it.
so cool.
There
Do
you
you have a
go.
hard stop, by the way? I know we're kind of running right at time. Yeah,
I'm getting
we're
pretty tight.
this has been amazing. I have one last question for you, and then I'll let you plug. So, if there was any startup you could create right now, if you had the funding and the time, which I know you don't have the time because you're crazy busy, what is the idea you would want to go forward with if you had the money and the time?
I'd create a virtual world
Hell yeah.
about fishing,
Love that.
and I don't even fish.
Just to sit in the water and chill. Nice. Okay, I know we're right at time. So is there anything you want to plug? Is there anywhere that people can find you? How do people follow you?
Well, you know, we give away our reports for free. That's how nice we are. That's a service that we provide. So if companies, brands, individuals, we love academics, great relationships and great friends in academia, you know, hit up our site, metaverse.consulting, request the reports. We send them out for free. You know, we love having discussions. You know, I said at the top of this call, you know, we always love doing these sorts of shows. Rising tides lift all boats, and anything that we can do to explain the metaverse to people can only be a really good thing. So, yeah, and if anyone's out there wants to speak to me, then I'm sure they can track me down via LinkedIn or via hitting up our
Amazing.
website.
We'll put both of those in the description. And thanks again, Nick. Really appreciate the conversation. That's the pod.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Really enjoyed it.